Professor Volquardsen, it's a pleasure to have you on our program. Thank you for taking the time for this conversation with me. I want to start this conversation with a question that is not hugely important, but I think it's really interesting, at least to me. You see, when I look at the world map to the far north and to the far south, I appreciate that the map is distorted because the globe, obviously, the Earth is round, but we have to flatten the map, which creates sort of sizes change. So when I look at Greenland's map to the far north, it just looks gigantic. Is Greenland really that big?
Yeah. Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Well, and you already mentioned the crucial thing, and that's the distortion because of the so-called Mercator scale or Mercator projection, which make areas that are close to the poles seem much larger than they actually
Yeah.
are. So if you look on a map of the world, Greenland seems as big as the whole continent of Africa, which is not the case.
Yeah.
So so yeah, it seems much bigger, but still it is, as often said, the largest or the biggest island in the world. And before I even start translating any numbers into the imperial system, I think it's right to say that Greenland is 3 times the size of the state of Texas.
Wow. That is huge.
But with that said, also, I think it's important to know for the audience who are probably not familiar with Greenland at all, or not that much, that even if Greenland is a big island, it doesn't really feel like living on an island, much rather than like living on an archipelago. And
Oh,
that is because there are no roads between the different towns and villages. There are, I think, around 75 inhabited places in Greenland, but you can't reach any of those by car or by train for that matter. So I live in Nuuk, which is the capital of Greenland and by far the largest settlement with
it's in
around
the
20,
southwest. Do I have it
in
correctly?
the southwest of the country. It has
Hmm.
around 20,000 inhabitants. But the road ends after like 5 miles or so when you reach the airport.
Yeah.
So for us in Nuuk, traveling to another place, another town, or even a village is just the same feeling almost as going on a travel abroad. So it much more feels like living on a small island within a large archipelago. That
That
is a
is,
special thing about Greenland, which I think listeners have to know right away to imagine how life is in
I'm
Greenland.
so glad you shared that with us. That's fascinating. So, do you essentially take a boat to go from one town to another town that may be an hour away?
Well, that again depends where in Greenland you're living. We have areas in the very south of Greenland and in the west coast, northwest coast area, which is the area around the, well, second most known town of Ilulissat, which has developed into a touristic hub or a touristic destination, not least because of the UNESCO World Heritage of the ice fjord and glacier around
Hmm.
there. So in those two areas in the north and the northwest, you have quite many smaller settlements and villages close to each other. So there people actually would take private boats to visit a neighboring town or village for a day or an afternoon. That would be possible. Um, in the area around Nuuk, and that has to do also with the policies that we are probably going to talk about in a minute, urbanization being one of the results of those. In the area around the capital, you have very few other inhabited places. So for us in Nuuk, it is, well, almost impossible to go to another place by boat or on a daily basis. So you would really have to use a plane in order to get to
Oh,
another town or a coastal ship or sort of a ferry that goes from the north to the south on the western coast. And the entire trip takes 1 week. So it comes by Nuuk once a week. Yeah, and for instance, if you want to go to Ilulissat, that would take 2 days. If you want to go to Sisimiut, which is another larger settlement or larger town, that would take 1 day. So we do not travel that much within the country.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
some people apparently do, but it's not like everyone does it. So for a person like
Wow.
me, I have to admit, I go abroad much more often than I travel within Greenland.
Oh, wow. Okay. And that makes a lot of sense because of the roads and also where Greenland is and your desire to to go on vacations as you're right now, which we're very delighted that you're joining us, giving us your time during your vacation. You said that the capital of Greenland, Nuuk, has a population of about 20,000, which begs the question, how many people live in Greenland?
It's around 56 or 57,000.
Oh my Lord. So it's got I don't know this, I'm just conjecturing, but it's probably the least densely inhabited area in the world. Is that
I
correct?
think it is. Well,
Oh
I mean,
wow.
if you compare it to all sovereign countries, well, Greenland is not one of those yet, but
Yeah.
it is probably, no, I'm quite sure it is the least densely populated country in the world. Yeah. But another thing I might add is that only the coastal areas of Greenland are inhabitable because of the inland ice sheet, which covers like, I think, around 85% of the entire
Wow.
landmass of Greenland. So you actually only have like 12 or 15% of the entire country, which is free of ice, where you actually can have settlements. And then you have these clusters of settlements, as I told you, in the south and in the northwest. And then you have the Nuuk area, which is quite unique. And then you have very few areas where you have extremely remote towns and villages up in the far north of the country and also on the east coast of the country, where there live 3,000 people on the entire east coast. So 53,000 out of the 56,000 inhabitants of Greenland live on the west coast. That is the coast that is directed towards northern Canada, right?
Um, so who are these 56,000 people that live on the coast of Greenland? I'm looking at you, sir. I'm engaged with you right now. And to me, for you look of European background, right?
I am.
Okay.
I am an immigrant, if you uh, want to
Okay.
put it that way. No, I moved to Greenland 9 years ago.
Okay. From Denmark, from
I'm German
Germany.
originally,
Okay.
but so there is, of course, also some immigration in Greenland, some professional immigration, but also other kinds of immigration. We have the largest immigrant groups are not from Europe, but from Southeast Asia, actually. So there is about
Oh,
3,000 people from the Philippines and from Thailand. And
wow. Okay.
well, out of the 56,000 inhabitants, I believe around 90% or maybe 85% would identify as indigenous peoples, as Inuit, and yeah, they make up the indigenous
Wait,
population
doesn't
of.
Canada also have Inuits?
Oh, they do, yeah.
Are
There
these
is,
the same Inuits?
well, there are other Inuits, of course, but they are
No,
related
I.
to Inuits. So you're
Thank
totally right.
you.
There
That
is this term called Inuit Nunat, which means the land of the Inuit, and
mm,
this is both Greenland and the northern provinces of Canada, like Nunavut and parts of the Northwestern Territories. And then you have Inuit people as well in Alaska, and very few also
yeah.
on the easternmost tip of Russia. So that is the area where Inuit people live. And historically, there had been several waves of migration of Inuit people. So the Inuit people originally probably are from Alaska around there, and they migrated through what we today call Canada, northern Canada, towards Greenland, where they arrived around 1200.
Oh,
So
wow.
the Inuit of Greenland, or those people living in Greenland today, are descendants of Inuit who immigrated to Greenland in around the year 1200. There have been waves of immigration before that, many thousands of years before that. We call them Paleo-Inuit, but they are not related to today's Greenlanders. So there have been people living in Greenland for thousands of years, but today's Inuit population, which, as I said, makes up 85% of the total population, they came around 1200, and they migrated from what we today call Canada, from the very north of Canada, Ellesmere Island.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah. It's a huge
Between
island itself.
Ellesmere Island and the northernmost part of Greenland, there is a small area where the distance between the coasts is only around 20 miles. That means you can walk across the sea ice when it's frozen. So the migrants in 1200, and maybe even later, some others, they came over the sea ice from the north, and they settled the entire west coast of Greenland from the north towards the south.
Yeah. As you were describing the Inuits, I recall my own visits to both to museums in Victoria and Vancouver, and also to in Anchorage, Alaska. And they were, I learned about Inuits, and it's just amazing how vast their territory is all the way to Greenland. Um, are Inuits the longest immigrant group that still exists?
Well, yes. Well, what I have to add, of course, is who are these other 15%? They
Please,
are,
yeah.
they are, of course, mostly of Scandinavian or Danish heritage. That is, of course, Greenland has been colonized by Denmark, and there are still a lot of, well, Danish people in the country. Yeah, so that would be the second largest group after the indigenous Inuit population. And then, of course, there are descendants of both Inuit and Danish parents. So these make this is probably the largest group. But even people who have one Danish parent would identify as indigenous Inuit, of course. But of course, there has been a lot of mixing during the last centuries. So
Yeah.
the most Greenlanders today are probably both of Inuit descent and European, that is to say, Danish descent. Yeah.
Um, Greenland is part of North America, right? I read in one of your papers that I think you were referring to the capital of Greenland, Nuuk, that is less than a quarter of distance to northern Canada than it is to Denmark, something to that effect. Yet, to us Americans, Greenland seems very European, or like sort of almost belongs to Europe in our perspective.
Well, yeah, maybe. Um, I don't think that anyone in Greenland today would identify as European.
Interesting. Okay.
Although Greenland, of course, has historically more connections with Europe than with America, or at least in the more recent history. And that is because of the colonial history
Yeah.
with Denmark. So that means, as in many post-colonial states, I mean, you can see that in Africa, when you
Of
want to
course.
go from
Yeah.
one African capital to another, you have to change planes in France, in Paris, right? Because of the colonial history. A
Yeah.
little bit the same in Greenland. So until very recently, everything went through Copenhagen. Copenhagen was the only place you could go to by plane. Yeah. So whenever I wanted to go to the United States for a conference, for instance, I had to go to Copenhagen first, which makes no sense.
That is
Then,
ridiculous. You
yeah,
flew all the way east to Northern Europe,
exactly.
then you flew.
And
Wow.
geographically, of course, Greenland is part of the North American continent. It's
Yeah.
close to Canada, right?
Yeah.
And yes, but there has not been any connection to Canada or
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
Inuit Canada until very recently. So it has been impossible to go there without traveling around half of the world almost. But this has now changed very recently. Um, and it is part, I think, of a greater development um, where Greenlanders are rediscovering their connections with their relatives in the other areas where Inuit people live. But we also have opened a new airport in Nuuk very
Hmm.
recently, and now they have established a direct flight to Iqaluit, which is the capital of Nunavut in Canada. And from next summer on, that is summer of 25, there will be a direct flight to Newark, New Jersey for the first time. That
Wow,
is
that's
a game
wonderful.
changer.
That
That
is a game
means
changer, huge.
it's really a game changer in a country where everything, trade-wise, tourism-wise, exchange of people and goods went through Copenhagen, where no one even really questioned the fact, this absolutely absurd fact that everything went through Copenhagen. Now there is a connection to New York, and maybe there will be others in the near future. And I think this means really a lot for almost every aspect of everyday life, be it the economy, be it the cultural scene, be it tourism. Yeah, I mean, when people can go Christmas shopping to New York instead of going to Copenhagen, it will probably take some years for them to get used to the fact that this is possible. But I believe some of them might think New York is more attractive.
Well, I've been to New York during Christmas. I can tell you it's very exciting. I cannot compare it to Copenhagen because I haven't been there. I'm sure Copenhagen is wonderful as well. This is a fascinating development. It's great. Um, I in preparing for this conversation, one of the things that I decided that I'm going to ask you about is kind of like the inside story of Greenland. It may seem like it's a small point to raise here, but I think it's a big deal because most of us are not familiar with Greenland at all. Um, what is it like to live in Greenland? You already told us about the, I don't know, sedentary lifestyle. People don't really travel, but 6 months is night, 6 months is day. What do people do? What do people worry about? How do they meet and date? Anything you like to share?
Yeah. Well, the size of Greenland, of course, means that there are also differences in well, light. Yeah. I mean, in the very south of Greenland, it's much lighter. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
For instance, in the darkest period of the year, that's around November, December, we have still almost 5 hours of daylight. Yeah. But that changes as soon as you cross the polar circle. So in the north of the country, it's not 6 months dark, but maybe 2.5 or 3. Yeah. So you have that period of darkness there, and yeah, I think it is true to say that lifestyles are probably very different depending on where you live in the first place, and also what your profession is, what you do. I think there are a lot of very, very different lifestyles. So when you come to Nuuk for the first time, I mean, it's of course it's a very different scenery than anything in the United States or Europe, but well, I mean, after all, life is not that different because you can basically get everything you want to in stores. There are restaurants, there are cafes. You can drive your car within the city, and you can take a bus. And well, the life is not that different from life in Western countries. But this is, of course, not the case for smaller settlements outside of the capital, where where the minority of Greenlanders lives. I have to say that, but those people, or a lot of those people, still have lifestyles which are um, yes, a subsistence economy in large scale.
Wow.
So they go hunting and fishing. Of course, they have to pay their bills. So they are there. It's not a total subsistence economy, but they really they catch the food that they need for themselves.
Yeah, that they
And they
eat.
maybe sell some seal skins for for the clothing industry, or for export, in order to be able to pay their electricity bills. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's very diverse. And when you come to the east of the country and in the far north of the country, is again another picture, because there you have actually different groups of Inuit people who also speak another language than that which is spoken in the West.
Oh,
So, so there
wow.
we have still Inuit lifestyles, of course, but other cultures. The north, in the very north of the country, close to the American air base of Pituffik, we have a small group of people called the Inuit, who actually first immigrated to Greenland in the 19th century, and that is also why their language is more reminiscent of modern day Inuktitut, which is the language spoken in Nunavut, Canada, than
Mm.
it is similar to Western Greenlandic. And these people also have different ways of hunting. For instance, they still use the frozen sea ice for traveling.
Oh,
So where others would take their boats,
yeah.
those people would take dog sledges in
I
order to
love
get
it.
from one place to another. Yeah, and that means that the winter term, the winter month, are the month where mobility actually is better, because they can use the frozen
Yeah.
sea to
Yeah.
travel and also to hunt. And there again, climate change, of course, makes severe problems, especially for those people out
And
there.
climate change is a big thing,
Yeah.
big issue, especially for Greenland, and we're going to talk about that. But before we go to the next segment, what I want to know is this. You said, in Nuke, you can buy anything. There are stores and all of that. Uh, and because of its location, you still get, I don't know, do you get Amazon deliveries? Do you get, are you connected to the world banking system, or does that still go through Denmark? Uh, any limitations in Nuke itself?
Well,
No.
it can take several weeks, and yes, all the mail goes through Denmark, but we still get them.
I see. Good, good. All right. We'll be back after a short break to talk about Greenland's relationship with the United States, including in recent weeks after Mr. Trump's desire to purchase Greenland for America. We'll be right back. Professor Volquardsen, in the last segment, you made an interesting comment, and I wrote it down. You said you were talking about Greenland, and then you said something to this effect: not yet independent. So, what is Greenland's governing structure? I hear the word autonomous used often. So, when we say autonomous, how autonomous?
Yes. Well, some dates, I'm afraid I have to mention.
Please
Greenland was
do.
colonized by Denmark in 1721 and remained a colony officially until 1953. That is
Oh,
after
okay.
the
Wow.
Second World War. So we can talk about that time if you want to, but just in order to make, uh, just in order to explain the difference between this colonial period and the period afterwards, is that the colonial system between 1721 and 1953 was about preserving the traditional lifestyles of the Inuit. So the Danish Royal Trade Company was interested in seal skins and seal blubber as a resource, which you actually which was a commodity at that time that you could make a lot of money with, because it was used for the production of soap, and it was used for lighting up all the street lights actually in the
Oh, okay.
European cities. So that is very important to know. During the colonial period, Denmark was interested in keeping the lifestyles, the traditional lifestyles of the Inuit going. And they were actually not interested in modernizing the country in any way. That totally changed after the war, after the year 1953, when Denmark met the demands for decolonization from the United Nations with, well, a little bit unorthodox way. They incorporated Greenland into the Danish state. Instead of, well, giving autonomy to the colony, they did the opposite. They incorporated Greenland into the state and made it an officially equal Danish province or county or whatever you might call it.
Oh,
That meant
okay.
that they had to turn their policy around 180 degrees and had to modernize the country. And that means make it Danish, may assimilate the population as quickly as possible, whereas they had preserved the traditional lifestyles before. Now, in order to meet the demands of an officially equal province, the lifestyles of the Inuit had to be on the same level as of the other Danish citizens in Denmark. That meant
Let,
that all this period between 53 and the next decades is marked by a rapid modernization and assimilation policy, which again, uh, resulted in Greenlanders demanding more autonomy. And that happened in 1979. That's the next date when Greenland got home rule, that is a parliament and an own government. And from that year on, you can actually talk about the Kingdom of Denmark, which consists of Denmark proper, Greenland, and the Faroe Islands as kind of a federation, although this is not very often acknowledged. Denmark doesn't see itself as a federation,
yeah.
although it is. And then the last date I have to mention is in 2009, when Greenland went one more step further towards autonomy, when they get with the Self-Rule Act. And that means that they also obtained the rights over their soil, over their resources, and they obtained the right to declare independence from Denmark at a point of time in the future, whenever a plebiscite among the citizens of Greenland would be in favor of that
Oh,
step. And that's where we are now. And well, independence, I believe, is the political aim of a vast majority of Greenlanders and also the Greenlandic political parties. There are, I think, 5 or 6 political parties in the Parliament of Greenland, and at least 5 of them have independence as their political aim. So it's not a question about if, it's a question about how and when.
okay. As of 2009, after the Self-Rule Act, Greenlanders also got the rights, and by rights, you mean control of the proceeds and how they like to uh, capitalize, exploit those resources, our natural resources. And we're going to get to that. I think that's a big issue in the U.S. Greenland relations as well. But anyway, so I get that potential for economic potential of that, but they're not tapped in yet fully. So if Greenland does become independent, will the country with this will this new country survive economically?
But that is a really good question. And And the answer is, I don't know.
I think members of parliament don't know either. That's why they're probably debating this. Is this
I think
the
I think it depends on how you put it. The issue which is discussed also in Greenlandic politics very much these years and especially these weeks is about diversifying dependency. So right now, as I told you before, as we were talking about that everything goes through Copenhagen, that is pretty much the case also with skilled labor and work power and any kind of goods and also the other way around, so that Greenland exports first and foremost to Denmark. So this has to change in order to become not independent, but in order to diversify its context.
Professor
And
Volquardsen, that almost sounds like a closed system, kind of like, I don't want to go too far, but almost like the mercantilism of the 18th and early 19th century, where all the trade was between the home country and the colony or province, the way you're describing it. Trade goes back and forth between Denmark.
yeah, but the thing is, and this is something we see, especially in these days, there is an international interest in Greenland geopolitically. Yeah?
Yeah.
So there is several countries who would like to have a commercial and geopolitical presence in Greenland, the United States being one of them. And
What other countries?
well, I guess the Russians and the Chinese are interested
Yeah.
well, and so is the European Union. So for Greenland, that means opening up contacts with the rest of the world and trade connections and so on and so forth. Also means that, yeah, well, selling its geopolitical position as a kind of strategic service.
Wow.
I think that is what the discussions actually are about. So we have, I mean, that is one obstacle in these Danish Greenlandic relations, and it has been for so long time, this narrative of which is very prevalent in Denmark of colonialism in Greenland has been a benevolent thing. Yeah. And if Greenlanders want more independence and they want apologies for historical injustices and so on, that would be a sign of a lack of gratitude almost. Yeah.
Towards
And with
Denmark.
yeah, towards Denmark. That's how the discourse actually goes. And with the growing interest, with the growing focus on the Arctic and focus on Greenlandic raw materials and so on, it gets more and more obvious that what Denmark has been paying to Greenland thus far is not like a donation, but it's actually the market value of what nations are willing to pay in order to have a presence, commercial or
Do you have a
geopolitical
number for that amount?
in Greenland. So, I mean, the United States, they have a military base in Greenland, and there has been a defense agreement between Denmark and the United States since 1951. So the USA are actually renting quite a share of Greenlandic land. Why shouldn't they pay for that?
Yeah.
Yeah,
They're not paying for that? Is that what you're saying?
they're not paying for that. Yeah, but I mean,
Oh, wow.
so it is not that easy to say what is a sound economy. Of course, 56,000 people cannot be isolated. Yeah, so there will
Yeah.
always be connections with other parts of the world. And also, of course, when it comes to security issues and defense. But yeah,
Okay, couple of points to
that's
follow up here.
I think that's what I can say about that question. And then,
No,
of course, there is new areas which have of trade and economy which has not been well, used as far as tourism, for instance, is a growing industry in Greenland, and it will be in the coming years. There is, if Greenland can find partners with whom they can start up some mining project, that is another income source as well. Fisheries, of course, is the main export good right now, but the what is it called? The fish is only caught in Greenland and directly exported to Denmark right now.
So you don't process it.
If it were processed in Greenland, that could be another source of income.
Higher value export.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So there are some areas where, and I'm only telling you what Greenlandic politicians are talking about, where Greenland is looking for partners, international partners, in order to get these industry branches running and going.
Um, Professor Volquardsen, as you were going through different considerations for Greenland's economy and interest, one was its geopolitical location. We know that the Arctic is becoming more and more important. We know that, for example, Russians have a larger Arctic fleet than we do here in the US. We read about this all the time in the Wall Street Journal, how we don't have enough ice cutters and other such security presence up in the north. And you also talked about tourism and fisheries. One thing that, if you recall, you and I discussed during the break was climate change. And we're not going to get into the science of it, but we do know, as you stated in the prior segment, that 80% of Greenland is covered with ice sheets. As they begin to melt, rare earth metals are going to be available. And talk about that a little bit, because
Well,
that
they are already available now.
they are.
But
Oh, okay.
but it is quite hard. I'm not an expert in mining engineering either. But what I'm told is that they are very expensive to extract. In an Arctic environment with that infrastructure, or the lack of infrastructure that Greenland has. But there are already now different places in Greenland where rare earth raw materials can be found. As far as I know, it is the second largest reserve after China. So
Yeah,
it's also one of the reasons why the international interest in Greenland as a, well, yeah, commercial site is growing, both from the United States and from the European Union, and maybe also others like Canadians, Australians, so forth.
yeah, it
So
could break the monopoly of China on rare,
definitely,
rare earth metals.
yeah.
So,
But of course, one of the dilemmas is that this has to be done in the way that does not harm the environment on the one side,
of
and on
course,
the other side, the lifestyles of the local indigenous population. And that, I believe, is probably one of the hugest conflicts in the years to come globally, that all the resources we need for the green transition on a global scale are not well, are not necessarily extracted in a sustainable way. Yeah, so
yeah,
there might be a conflict between the energy transition, the green transition on the one side, and then the lifestyles of indigenous peoples, or the livelihoods of indigenous peoples on the other side. These things do not necessarily go hand in hand, and I think this is one of the huge dilemmas, or the huge challenges of the future, which we already now see in Greenland.
yeah. Let's talk about America.
Sure.
Before we started our interview, you shared a news update with me that Donald Trump Jr. had landed in Greenland, in Nuuk, yesterday. I think it was January 6th, 2025. is and that news has been confirmed. That event
Well,
actually happened.
he has been here today for about 5 hours, and it has been on the news channels like 24/7. Has been the topic both in Greenland and in Denmark.
What is America's president-elect's son doing in Greenland now?
Yeah, he was officially it was a private visit, but well, of course it was because his father is not in office yet.
Yeah.
No, what he was doing, I believe, what I read and what I'm told, it was a PR stunt. So he was like filming videos for his and his father's social media channels, and well, in order to have some footage to make some propaganda about Greenlanders allegedly wanting to be bought by the United States, which is what Donald Trump repeatedly said would be his plan.
What
And
do?
and he and he confirmed that like 2 hours ago at a press conference where he actually said that he couldn't rule out the use of military power in order to obtain this goal. So
That
it
is
sounds
wild.
absurd, but it is actually quite serious.
It is quite serious. He will be the president of the United States. That's no joke when someone makes that claim. So, what do Greenlanders think of this?
Well, I can't speak on behalf of Greenlanders, and I'm sure there are different opinions. So, what the Prime Minister of Greenland, Munthe he wrote several statements on social media today, and he uh, said we should all maintain composure and keep calm. Yeah, I think those who are much more nervous actually are the Danes. So
Danes?
it was really breaking news all day long. There was special reports almost 24 hours on all the Danish outlets. But because I mean it's about yeah, it's about buying or wanting to buy 98% of the territory of the Kingdom of Denmark, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
the Greenlanders are, I believe, yeah, I think there are probably also people who become nervous, but they are a little bit more relaxed because in this triangular connection, the United States, Denmark, and Greenland, they are actually quite in a comfortable position
Oh,
uh, because well, they were at least before these very harsh and concrete statements today. Because, as I told you before, as I mentioned before, the international interest in Greenland is good for Greenlanders' position in negotiations with, first and foremost, Denmark about confronting historical legacies, about the future status of the union between the two countries, where Greenlanders, of course, would like to achieve even more self-determination, equal rights, which is not the case right now. Yeah. So when there is an interest in Greenland from other players in the world, that of course puts a pressure on Denmark, yeah,
of course, yeah,
in this post-colonial relation, and this
yeah.
is not necessarily bad for Greenland. So it actually helps, or it has helped, if they use their playing cards in the right way. It can help to well obtain some political goals within this union that otherwise would not be possible.
They can
So
almost play
I
one
think
power against the other.
yeah, exactly. I think Greenland is playing this game really smartly, and it is also legitimate to play this game because the Greenlandic government should act in the interest of the Greenlandic people. It's much more difficult for Denmark, which has to act both in the interest of the Danish people, but also in the
Yeah,
interest of the
yeah.
Greenlandic people. But with that said, I think um, uh, although we will probably see and read otherwise on Donald Trump's social media channels in the days to come, there is not a large share among the Greenlandic populations who are supporters of President Trump. I can tell you that. So
Oh,
his remarks on buying a country are so much in conflict with the right of self-determination, and also his treatment of minorities is also something that must appear alarming to an indigenous population, which of course always would be a minority, both within the state of Denmark and within any sort of construction with the United States. Yeah? So, but on the other hand, there is a willingness to open up for trade relations, for collaborations, and for this diversification of dependency in order to obtain a more, self, the word that is used in Greenland is statehood, but others also talk about the possibility of a what is that called, a free association model, which the United States have with some
the federal system.
Pacific nations, Pacific Island nations.
Yeah.
So there is an openness towards business, towards trade, towards cultural exchange, also with the indigenous North American world, of course. But I mean, the idea that Greenland would become American territory is still absurd.
Absurd. In one of your publications, referring to the relationship between the United States and Greenland, not just recent, the last, let's say, 10 years or so, just overall in the last century, you used the term ambivalent. It was sort of a general term. What do you mean by that? And that term wasn't specifically used for Mr. Trump.
No. I think I meant it in a different way. I think, the Americans seriously entered Greenlandic history during World War II, while Denmark was occupied by the Germans, by the Nazis.
Yeah.
So that cut all the ties to Denmark, also the supplies, of course.
Yeah.
So, and as I mentioned before, Greenland had been, now we are in the colonial times, before 53, a totally closed off colony. So no one was allowed to enter, no one was allowed to leave. Everything went through Denmark. Yeah? So there had not really been contacts with the outside world besides Denmark. And then during World War II, American soldiers came to the country, and they brought Lucky Strike and Coca-Cola, and they brought chewing gum, and all these things you all of a sudden could get from the States. You could order stuff from catalogs all of a sudden, because the Americans stood for the supply of the country while Denmark was occupied. And this, of course, many people experienced as an opening up, being part of a global society all of a sudden. And of course, there were also intimate relations with American soldiers. I'm sure there were. So the Second World War, which was a tragedy for huge parts of the world, was maybe a little bit more ambivalent for the Greenlandic population, because for them it was more a step towards freedom, because these ties with Denmark were cut in that period. But on the other hand, so it was not only
on the other hand, okay.
On the other hand, you also had these military installations during the war and after the war, and
you mean during the Cold War?
During the Cold, the airports, they were built during the war, but became much more important even during the Cold War. And for instance, the air base at Bitterfik, which I've been talking about, was built in the early 1950s and led to that an entire people, the Inuit of northern Greenland, had to be had to be had to migrate, had to leave their village and were forced to migrate to another place. Yeah? And that was, of course, an infringement by
Yeah. Yeah.
authorities, in this case by American authorities. So that, I believe, is when I talk about ambivalence, is that there is not this one-sided positive or negative image of the United States, um, which also always is compared, of course, to Denmark, right?
Yeah.
So it's quite complicated.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, are there nuclear facilities or nuclear weapons stationed in Greenland?
There were, at least.
They were. Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
there were. Yeah, there was one nuclear installation underneath the ice sheet called Camp Century, which is also one of the negative points when it comes to the image of America in Greenland,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
there's a lot of nuclear waste under the ice sheet. And well, as the ice is melting, we don't know what is going to happen with it, right?
Wow. Um, Professor Volquardsen, how how did you end up in Greenland? You're German. I know that's a
Well,
personal question, but I'm so
that's
intrigued.
okay. That's great. No, my background is actually, I have a mixed academic background. I'm schooled in political science, anthropology, but I also have this background in a discipline called Scandinavian studies. I know you have that in the United States as
Yes,
well
yes, we
in
do.
some universities.
Yeah.
And at my university in Berlin back then, we were actually beginning to question, well, these, you know what, the reason why students chose to study Scandinavian studies back then was that they had this very, very positive image of this progressive area of Scandinavia with the welfare state and with the beautiful
Yeah.
countryside and all these really positive cliches that I know also exist in part of the United States about America. I mean, ask Senator Sanders, who's always painting pictures of Denmark as what the
Yeah.
American future should look like. Yeah, and well, we were beginning to question these well, really positive images. And isn't there another side of this as well, right? I mean, that's what you do when you are critically examining a subject or a region. Yeah,
Of course. Yeah.
uh, and then we came across, of course, that well, there is also a colonial history when it comes to Denmark, and it actually is, or Scandinavia, when it actually is. Salman Rushdie once said, "The British don't understand the history because it took place outside of Britain." Yeah? And there's a lot of truth in that statement. And I think it can be said about the Scandinavian countries, or especially Denmark as well, because you really only understand Danish identity and Danish mentality. And that had been my interest when you also know about the colonial relations. And so we began to dig into the history of Greenland and also the Virgin Islands and all the other colonies that Denmark once had, and in that way expanded the area that we were dealing with in Scandinavian studies. And this is something that since has been happening at many Scandinavian studies institutes, both in Europe and the United States. And that way I got, well, interested in colonial history in general and Greenland in particular, and met some wonderful colleagues from there and at conferences, and well, ended up uh, Yeah.
And you live
And
there permanently, or is this an assignment, sir?
no, I live there permanently, and I've been living there since 2016.
That's that's wonderful. Um, if you wanted our audience to remember just one point about Greenland, just one point, what would that be?
Well, that's a hard question.
Sorry to put you on the spot like that.
I think I think what I actually said in the beginning, that the largest island, in reality, it's more like an archipelago,
Oh, that's a good one.
a
Yeah.
group of small islands.
Yeah.
That is an important thing to know before you engage with Greenland or even think about going or moving there, right?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So that is
Wonderful.
really, I don't really think there are many other areas in the world which are which have this lack of a road network or a
Yeah.
train network.
I've been to Alaska. I know that there's a dearth of roads in Alaska, but the heavily populated areas like Anchorage, like the Kenai Peninsula, have a lot of roads. When you go far north or far west, that's the case. But the case of Greenland is on a whole different level. Professor Volquardsen, thank you so much for educating me and our audience. And to our audience, if you know of any history that could provide more perspective from the past on this subject, please share it with us and tell us what's your perspective. Thank you so much, Professor Volquardsen.
Thank you.